So here is GDP after the tax relief. See, GDP has gone up. The job creation looks good. And here's the last chart. Also very interesting. This is the one that we've talked about just a few minutes ago, which appears to almost invalidate the law of gravity. You cut taxes here. This red line here is federal revenues. And federal revenues are going down. And then we cut taxes, and you'd think, oh, they're going to go down even more. Terrible. There's going to be a huge deficit because we've cut taxes, and now there's going to be a deficit. And so the Congressional Budget Office adds it all up and says, well, golly, if we're making $100 with this tax now, and if we cut it in half, why, we'll only make $50. It seems like a logical assumption, but it's not. Take a look at what happened. When you cut taxes, businessmen invested the money. Businesses started getting going. And as businesses got going, it raised more taxes. And so what happens is the federal revenues actually go up as a result of the tax cut. And that's one of the reasons why there's this fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats always want to say that if you're going to do a tax cut, you have to pay for it by cutting something. Sounds like good economics. It's not good economics. The fact of the matter is, if you do tax cuts, if they're the right kind of tax cut, you actually get more federal revenues. And it does not hurt the deficit. It helps reduce the deficit. That was the effect in 2004, 5, 6, and 7. You can see 4 straight years of increases in federal revenues as a result of these taxes. Now here's the scary question again. I'm going to say it over and over. What happens if you turn this math upside down? What happens instead of reducing capital gains and death tax and dividends? What happens instead of reducing them if you increase them in the biggest tax increase in the history of the country? Will it not do the exact opposite? And when you increase those taxes, is it not possible that the federal revenues will drop even more rapidly and the deficit will become even more unimaginative but unmanageable? I think there is good evidence, and many solid economists would say that we do not want to allow these things to expire. Now, let's just say that the Congress votes in the next couple of days. As I think, being a member of Congress, I suspect we might well do this. We'll vote and we will pass this supposed tax cut deal. Does that solve the problem of excessive taxes? Well, it gets rid of a problem of the biggest tax increase in the history of the country coming, so it's averting a damage. But if you take a look at it where we are right now, we are still overtaxing, and we've got the unemployment problem. So it's good to avert the evil, but does it really fix where we are? No, it doesn't. And does that then change the red tape picture? No, the red tape picture is still bad. Does it change the liquidity picture of the banks? No, it doesn't change that. Does it change the high level of federal spending? No, it makes it worse because we're spending some money which is not tax cut money, but we're spending money on extending unemployment, which is a legitimate form of federal spending, which does affect the deficit. So it doesn't help the deficit in that way. And certainly the question of uncertainty is one of those things, is a glass half full or half empty? Right now we have certainty. There's going to be a train wreck. There's going to be an economic disaster on January 1st because we've not dealt with the massive, massive tax increase that's coming. There's some certainty in that. It also means there's a big problem coming. On the other hand, does kicking those tax cuts forward by 1 year or 2 years, does that create more certainty? Well, the answer is no. It's maybe a little more certain, but it still doesn't give you a basis for planning, for estate planning, or for capital gains, dividends, those kinds of things. For the businessman, no. Their loan cycle is typically a 5-year cycle to the banks, and so having a capital gains dividends policy that's extended out a couple of years doesn't get within that 5-year window. So is there more or less certainty? Well, you can argue back and forth. So the Republicans are caught in sort of a weird situation. We think, well, certainly you shouldn't nail America with the biggest tax increase in the history of the country. That doesn't make sense. But even if you avert that disaster, Does that mean these other elements are taken care of? And the answer is clearly no. Do you think that the things that's burdening our economy, that's holding down job creation, that's making it very difficult on families, do you think those conditions have been mitigated? No. No, we're still taxing too much. We still have too much red tape, too much uncertainty, too much federal spending. And the liquidity problem with the banks is still not taken care of. So here we are. We've got before us a bill. Republicans are kind of scratching their heads on it because it has some bad parts and some good parts. And we understand what we have to do. This bill is not really going to solve the problem of unemployment. It's not going to solve the problem of overtaxation. It just prevents an evil from happening. But it is interesting to note what level of risk there is ahead for America if this issue of these taxes is not dealt with. And we're not in a position to be able to do that. That's something that has to happen with the Senate, and it has to happen with the President. And they're going to have to get serious about reducing spending and also reducing taxing. And over the next number of months, I have not the slightest doubt that a Republican-run House is going to choose, they're going to choose jobs and paychecks over bureaucracy and unemployment, bureaucracy and food stamps. That's not our choice. Our choice on the American dream is to allow people to take risks, to invest their own money, and to get jobs and to receive paychecks. We think that's the best form of security economically, is a good paycheck. It's the best thing for a healthy nation. And so we will be making proposals to cut taxes, to cut red tape, to create certainty, and to reduce federal spending. All of those things, we will be making those proposals. But we won't be able to pass them. We can pass them out of the House, but it's got to get to the Senate. And if it gets through the Senate, it has to be approved by the President. And so everybody will be able to see what's going on. Now, in the past, when I was here, 2001, 2002, 2003, we passed a number of things through the House that were very good policy that no one paid any attention to. They were killed by Democrats in the Senate because we never had 60 votes in the Senate. A couple of those are kind of interesting. One of them was an energy bill because it said we've got to pay attention to the fact that we are dependent on foreign countries, particularly the Middle Eastern foreign countries, for our oil supply. We are too dependent on foreign oil. And so we put a number of energy bills together, killed in the Senate by Democrats. We also recognized that there was a problem with health care, that there were some things that were out of balance. We said there's some things have to be done. We've got to do some tort reform. We've got to do some associated health plans. And we've got to make some changes in health care. All of those proposals were killed in the Senate by Democrats. 20/20 hindsight, just like energy, fixing health care was an important priority. And then we also passed a bill particularly to try to rein in the excessive practices of Freddie and Fannie. President Bush, in September 11, 2003, in the New York Times, not exactly a conservative oracle, said he wanted authority from the House and from the Senate to allow him to regulate Freddie and Fannie because their financial practices were out of control and were going to really become a liability. We passed legislation to do that. It went to the Senate. It was killed by the Democrats in the Senate. In each of those cases, a Republican House passed legislation that historically you look back and say, policy-wise, you're right, nobody noticed it, the media didn't cover it, but it occurred, and you can check it, it's part of the record. And the same thing could happen in this next year, but I don't think it will. I don't think it will because I believe that Americans have been paying more attention to what's going on in government. I believe that Americans are fed up. I believe that Americans are at the point where they're saying the government is no longer the servant of the people. The government is becoming a master. It's an out-of-control government, and it's time to start putting the genie back in the bottle. And they're going to do that one way or the other. The question is whether those of us that have been elected to serve as servants are going to step up to our job, cut the red tape, cut the bureaucracy, cut the federal spending, cut the taxes, and make the federal government a servant of the people. In order to do that, we can't just simply say, well, we're going to take 10% off of this department, 10% off of that department, 10% off another department. We can't say we're going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, because there isn't any budget item that says waste, fraud, and abuse. It's a more complicated process than that. What we have to do is go back to the drawing board, which is the U.S. Constitution, and we have to start asking ourselves, what are the essential functions that the federal government must do? And those we must fund, and particularly that includes providing for the national defense. And the other things that are not essential that the federal government do, we must start to say, maybe we should just plain get out of that business and turn that back over to the states and turn it back over to the local cities and to the citizens of America and let them deal with those things, because Americans are fed up. They're fed up with unemployment. They're saying no more bureaucrats, no more food stamps. What we want is jobs and paychecks. And I think that's where the public is getting. And so the question then becomes, well, what's everybody going to do on this big tax bill? The answer is we could avert some evil, but we're not going to solve the real problems that we have to do by simply postponing or kicking these things down the line a little bit and creating more uncertainty and postponing them. On the other hand, we cannot allow the major tax increase to go forward. So you're going to see a checkered pattern in the voting, particularly the Republicans. There'll be some for and some against, and arguing whether the glass is half full or half empty. But there won't be any argument about what we need to do. There's no argument about the fact that we do not want 10% unemployment. There's no argument that we want the federal government to be a fearful master. We're sick of that, and it's time for things to change. And that is to some degree what has led me personally and quite a number of other Republicans to understanding that as we approach this next new year, that there is a new area that we have to go to. And that is, we have to take a good look at this wonderful chamber. We have to take a good look at the U.S. House and say, have we really run this place the way it should be run? Or have we allowed a series of fiefdoms over the years to build and develop, where we've created a structure that is so unmanageable, so crusty, so interconnected and from a systems point of view, so unmanageable that even if you put good people in it, you get bad results. I believe that the results of the excessive growth of the federal government indicates that there is a need for a redesign of the House entirely.